first, this week's one-on-one in 10 with co-leader of Te Pāti Māori, Ngarewa-Packer, on the impact of the latest storm on the whānau, the need to build climate change resilience at the marae level, and the cost of living fuel crisis. Kia ora, comrade. Welcome to the show. Thank you for being available to the fourth estate. Your democracy is grateful.
Kia ora. Thanks for having me.
Debbie, I had the unpleasant experience of listening to Sean Plunkett on the platform last week. They were mocking the idea that climate change is impacting Māori more. One caller's argument was, how would the rain know how to harm Māori more? They laughed. I cringed. Could you please explain to Sean and his angry white listeners how climate change impacts Indigenous people hardest?
Yeah, no, I'd rather not. I'm not a big fan of trying to give any understanding to people who never understand our worldview.
Preach.
So I believe to put your energy in an energy crisis, I'd rather put my energy where it's best spent, which is, first of all, commending our marae, our communities, who continue to step up and continue through, I guess the unintended consequences of growing capability and showing what a tiriti-centric Aotearoa is, which is actually cares for everyone, looks after everyone. And instead of relying on emergency heroism, I wish that we could have a nation and particularly a government that recognises what it is that they do and how it is that we avoid really bad situations. And I think, we've seen this with Gabriel, we've seen this up north. There is now an amazing capacity and resilience in the fact that you could see it in the civil defence and national defence, in NEMA, emergency defence, that they know they can rely on trusted parts of the community. And they're Māori, and they do predominantly accommodate and look after people from marae spaces. And we saw it in Ōpōtiki, Wakatane, we've seen it in Tauranga, we've seen it in Taitokero, and it just continues to stretch all weekend, where if you have to evacuate, you've got somewhere safe for you and your whānau, for you and your tamariki, and in many cases your animals and your pets. And, they've, again, stacked on crisis after crisis, that they have the ability to do what Wellington can't. And so, we need it. And these aren't coincidences that that there aren't deaths. It's not coincidences that people can retreat safely, not knowing what's coming and understanding we're getting to cyclone, weather patterns now. And I think it's really important to recognise that capacity, invest in that capacity, and not wait for directives from government. Trust the local knowledge.
Once again, marae have opened their doors to every member of the community impacted by another climate event. How angering was it to you that this government scrapped the emergency management bill because National Act and New Zealand First didn't like the co-governance language in the bill? Marae are the very front line of the ongoing extreme weather. Why aren't they given the mana they deserve?
I think that there's just a general ignorance about Te Tiriti, and it just triggers everybody, those who don't understand what tino rangatiratanga means, those that don't enjoy the hospitality, the holistic care that that Māori and many around Aotearoa give and receive. And I think what we needed to do is understand that we should invest in these at scale. I went over to Gabriel. I saw how marae were cleaning up before anyone even arrived. And you've got to remember the frontline emergency, the army, they need to be kept for acute situations. They need to be, and I just really can't praise the way that marae act as emergency hubs, and the fact that people are insecure by that knowledge, and that general love and care for everyone is a real sad missed opportunity. But they continue to stand up, and they continue to stand up with real mana. And again, I've sort of seen some say, it wasn't as big of a cyclone. Well, the reality is, if it was, they were prepared.
Te Pāti Māori have been tireless in their criticism of this government's response for the poorest Kiwis to the fuel crisis. How on earth are whānau who are just holding on by their fingernails with the cost of living going to handle the new Treasury forecast of a possible 7.5% inflation spike if the Strait of Hormuz remains closed?
Look, I mean, I think, first of all, what we have seen is the government has valued the voters that they connect to the most,
Right.
which are not those who are struggling the most. They're not Māori communities. They're not rural communities. They're not beneficiaries. They're not, but they are racehorses. We have seen a bit of relief, woohoo, for
Sure,
the,
sure.
the racehorsing sector. And I think, what we've got now is, and I think I saw something, don't quote me, but there was something like if you need uh, the fuel supply for last week has gone up an extra $40. So if you were like on 43 kilometers that you had to do a week, it's now $150.
Wow.
And that is now, and I know that this government continues to talk about the middle squeezed, or the squeezed middle, sorry. What about the squeeze, beneath the middle? What about those who are carrying 2 to 3 jobs? What about those who are elderly, have worked all their lives as superannuants and need to get to hospitals and need to get to, cities
Right.
where there are only grocery stores? So I think what we're seeing now is that the petrol prices, we need to have relief, and we need to see also what the phases are going to look like at the varying stages of the supply. Because remember, the supply notifications we're getting are days old.
Yes.
They're days old. So, we don't really have a true picture of what's on shore. We're
we
really
don't.
reliant on these
Yes.
boats getting, or ships getting through, which
Yep.
I think we can see through to the end of this month, but it's the following months that has got some real anxiety. So, we've got petrol prices past $3, $3.40, $3.50, diesel up nearly 90%. And so, that's whānaus, that's
Yeah.
taxpayers, New
Yeah.
Zealand taxpayers who have whakapapa, who are choosing between kai, fuel, taking someone to school, taking someone to the doctors, and the amount of people that we have as constituents and the large Māori electorates that are choosing on whether they can afford to get a tooth extracted. It is just that critical. And there was already a cost of living crisis.
Right.
Yeah, so there's real strain in communities. And I think the cost of living is going to be, I think I saw some stats saying it's going to be 50% higher than expected this year. That's just landing so painfully. And we need to see a government that cares. And on that note, did you actually see the Prime Minister during anywhere on the cyclone?
They like to hide him at the moment, don't they?
So we need to see leadership that cares. And we have, and so the unions called out to have a cross-party approach, not to interfere in obviously their big decisions, but to try and advocate for all communities to be seen during this crisis. And it's two crises in one community. We've got cyclones, we've got fuel crisis, and they're not separate events. You've got, whānau bearing the cost of a world that's, crazy, and then they're trying to absorb the shock with a government that doesn't seem to have any empathy for them at all.
The reality, whether the right like it or not, is that climate change driven by human pollution is rapidly changing our climate. The modelling tells us that this is now the norm moving forward, and that these storms are only going to get more intense and more damaging. You have released a fascinating renewable energy policy. What is Te Pāti Māori's response to the climate change challenge?
Look, I think first of all, it's because I'm from Taranaki, and so we're not and was a very active iwi CEO in that space. So we're not out of the loop of what it means when there's a limited amount of companies that are actually able to produce. So we've known for a very long time that we needed to take an active just transition approach. And that what that has to look like is actually not just building, forever corporate companies, but figuring out how we can get households off the grid into some solar, be able to get communities into renewable energy spaces, lower the cost of living, and get it at scale. And I think these are some of the things that smarter people than me are leading by example on how you can run your businesses, how you can run communities. But what we continue to do is sit there and have corporate views of life that don't bring any extra support to again, the average New Zealanders, those of us who are living on the ground. So, there's some things that we think that the government could do
Mm-hmm.
to help. There's
Mm-hmm.
some things that they could do to incentivize businesses. I think being able to get finance is really difficult. Being able to take up EVs is really difficult. And
Mm-hmm.
so I think that there is a really smart way we can go about it, but we've got a government that's in denial of the extent of the issue and are really stuck on the fossil and fuel model.
Solar panels in every marae?
Absolutely. Solar panels in
Preach.
libraries. I mean,
Preach.
we're seeing it. I mean, government spent $500,000 to get, solar on its building.
Yeah.
Taxpayers paid for that. Why can't we sit there and lead by example and get it out to the communities? And we're really captured by these large corporates that set the price. So the retail, there's absolutely no competition. So it's easily done, but again, they pulled that funding back as well. So yeah, I think there's a lot we could be doing a lot better. But continuing off with this old model of reliance on fossil and fuels, and I think that's the hardest part about this is there's not a conversation on how we can do it at scale and how we help those who could really immediately gain a better quality of life. Because when you're well, you learn. When you learn, you earn.
Finally, Debbie, how should New Zealand be using its voice on the international stage right now?
Oh, the same way that we have in the past when, we stood up for women's rights, when we stood against anti-nuclear, when we led the charge on, what it is to be a proud Pacifica nation. I think it doesn't matter, we've seen Spain do it. It doesn't matter how big or how small we are. We are a nation that has prided ourselves in peace.
Right.
And I think, and has never been about any attacks on civilians. We were too quiet. I mean, we're shameful during Gaza.
Yes.
And in this, we continue to show blind allegiance to, really what seems to be quite an unhinged leader.
Right.
In America, a very unhinged. I mean, he's got the worst public relations team around. I don't know what they must be doing, but long story short, we should be showing who we are as a country.
Yes.
We're a country of big heart that looks after people, that's multicultural. We know what it's like to come through some pretty hard times, including colonization. We land on our feet and we show what it is to lead by example, a peaceful nation, a respectful, dignified nation. And that's what we should be taking. We don't even know what the conversations are that they're having because there's no transparency around it. So I think, we certainly don't want to be looking like we're shoulder buddies with Israel and America. We should be leading by example, as small as we are.
Thank you, comrade. We'll again talk to you next month.
Anytime. Ka kite.
Cheers.